listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, AstralMeadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined once again with my friend Kimmie Haliburda. She is a psychic intuitive, animal communicator, Reiki practitioner, and energy worker. She earned 2 bachelor's degrees at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville in both philosophy and sociology, with a concentration in environmental issues. She is currently pursuing a master's in sociology with a concentration in political economy and globalization at UTK. She is a retired racing greyhound foster mom and a pit bull advocate, although she does also foster the occasional kitten. In today's episode, we'll be delving into existential philosophy and how we can use existential teachings to guide how we manipulate energy for ourselves and also our healing practices. Welcome to the show.
Howdy.
Hey. Nice to have you back on.
Yeah, it's always so nice.
Yeah. And I feel like every time we end, we're like, oh, but we could have covered this, so we're going to have to do nothing.
Well, and then we talked for like an hour.
Right.
So it's never like, this turns into like a half-day event.
Right.
Because we talk for maybe as long as the podcast is, like after we're done, which is great.
Right. It's like coming together as friends, and then sometimes we record parts of it for the public.
Yeah.
So they get the in on it.
So you're welcome. Yeah. This is a privilege. It's a privilege to listen to our conversations.
Right. I love it. So, all right. So could we start with you just briefly explaining what you mean by energy manipulation?
Yeah, so I really want to lay the groundwork for our topic today. So energy manipulation is the moving and morphing of energy typically facilitated by an individual. There are many modalities of energy manipulation, such as candle work, psychic energy manipulation, and witchcraft. And witchcraft in general is pretty morally open-ended. As an individual doesn't have to adhere to any particular moral code to use these tools. There are exceptions. You know, of course, like with the do no harm stance of Wicca, I'm not an expert in Wicca. I'm also certainly no expert in specific types of witchcraft, such as Santeria, because I'm a very basic white girl and I don't know those things. So I'm not going to pretend like I do. So I'm speaking about what you really see with generalized witchcraft practices, whether that be candle work, like the burning or usage of herbs, trinkets, and other items to manipulate energy. Right. So that's what I mean specifically by energy manipulation in this. And other forms of energy manipulation include Reiki, Marconics, quantum healing. These forms of energy manipulation and the moral codes therein will not be speculated or questioned within the context of this episode. These healing modalities are to be used only for betterment, which means that they will not be examined within the framework of existential thought.
Right.
So I just want to make that very, very clear. We're not talking about anything that has a moral code assigned to it that one must adhere to use. We're talking more about like the free will of the individual and how they use energy and how they manipulate energy. And when I say energy manipulation, people hear the word manipulation and they automatically have like a negative connotation, but it just means the movement and the morphing and the changing and the flowing of energy. And that's all manipulation is.
Right. It just gets a bad rap with the psychological manipulation, you know, but it's not actually talking about the same thing.
No, it's just changing and morphing. So you know, you can manipulate energy to help heal people. You can manipulate energy to help yourself get a job. Like there's all kinds of different ways. You can manipulate energy to keep people away from you that don't do good things for your life and that don't serve a higher purpose for you, right? So that's what I mean by energy manipulation.
Right. Okay, so let's jump into talking about existentialism and what it is and how it pertains to this particular area of interest.
So I just want to start off and say that I'm not an expert in existentialism by any means, which Astral makes a face at, but it's true. She's like just scowled at me.
She has studied. She has studied this topic. She's allowed to talk about it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't have like my PhD in philosophy or even a master's, but I have a bachelor's in philosophy. But I got into philosophy because I discovered Friedrich Nietzsche, and I really, really liked several of the books that he'd written, especially Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and that's what jettisoned me into wanting to take philosophy as a major, right? So I went in with some previous knowledge, and then I've, studied up after as well, and I got really into Sartre too. I discovered I really like Sartre during my time at UT, but I didn't cover him as much as I would have liked. So, I delved into him more later after graduation too, just on my own. Right. But admittedly, I watched several YouTube videos to make sure that before this, to make sure that I was right on point with what I was talking about. So first of all, philosophy is all about the dialectics, and which means that existentialism is also about dialectics. Language is really important when constructing a philosophical argument. That being said, existentialism is all about finding one's meaning in a meaningless, innately unimportant world, which sounds very weird for that to come out of my mouth with the subjects that you and I have talked about so many times, and with what the basis of this podcast is really about, right? You look into different spiritual beliefs. So it's really an odd stance to say, hey, let's do this podcast. Let's do an episode about existentialism where the world doesn't have a meaning and you have to ascribe a meaning to your own life.
Right.
Okay. So it's weird, right? But so existentialism is the belief that people create their own purpose and meaning for life without being granted a predetermined path. So that's essentially existentialism, and we'll get into more details of it. But basically, people look for answers in an answerless world,
right?
Which is horrifying.
Right, it can be.
Yeah,
and I was sitting with this, thinking about how this episode might unfold and things, and why is it important, to allow yourself the headspace to sit with these different philosophies and even like when you study other belief systems and stuff, and it's not that you have to be like, oh, I'm at this now, but I think it's really healthy to sit with things, even if you don't fully understand them or they make you feel uncomfortable, to see, okay, like, what is this bringing up for me? And like, if you are like for or against this or that, but ask yourself like the whys. And so even if you're not like, oh, I'm an existentialist now, it's still cool to sit with it, and like, I always loved that about college is that, I could study things without saying, oh, I have to fully submerge myself into this, but I can still study it and say, okay, what is this lighting up for me? Like, how is this going to help me evolve as a person in the future? And existentialism is one of those things that when you sit with it, all sorts of, questions kind of come up, like, who am I? Like, am I important? Like, is this life, worth, is it meaningful? Well, you give it the meaning. And so like you become the creator, which is kind of a cool thing to think about, right? You have all this power now. So I don't know. I think it's important to sit with different philosophies and different people and just hear them out, for just that moment. So.
Well, being exposed to different thoughts and belief systems than what you're typically used to, or maybe even something that is so like something that's beyond just something adjacent, right? Mm-hmm. Like something that's so on the other side of the spectrum of what you would typically believe in. I think it can be really enlightening, and you might delve into a subject and think, wow, I really, really don't like this. I'm glad I looked into this and figured out that I can't prescribe to any of this, right?
Right.
Like, but then there's also those times when you look at something and you're like, maybe there are parts of this that I can use in my own journey.
Right.
Like my own spiritual journey, right? Or just as life lessons, whether it's healing from trauma or whatnot. And I'll delve into that more, that specifically, like how I use it and how I find it to be helpful, because this is also like subjective, right? So we'll talk objectively about what is existentialism within the scope of a 45-minute to 1 hour podcast. And then I'll get into more details about personal beliefs on it.
Right. So how does essentialism relate to existentialism?
So essentialism is the belief that the essence of a thing gives that thing purpose and meaning. Aristotle talked about the essence of a thing, which is the properties that something must have to make it what it is. They attribute to the meaning of one's life to their essence, and it was something that was predetermined before someone was born. It's really important to note that Aristotle was born around 384 BCE, so he came along like way before Christianity. But predeterminism later became popular with the three Abrahamic religions, but especially with Aristotle's philosophical teachings because of predeterminism. And just a side note, I don't like Aristotle. Like at all. He was very, very sexist. He referred to women as like half men. Not cool. Anyway, but essentialism was the main philosophical concept until around the end of the 19th century, in which existentialism became like another way of thinking about life. And the meaning of life, right?
Right. And I feel like it could be a little shocking because it really did present this new idea, So it was like, I think sometimes there was that, almost like it's just so mind blowing because it's like, well, we haven't thought like we haven't. You're giving us too much power, right? You're making us use our mind, right? It's like a good mind stretch.
Yeah. No, it's totally a good mind stretch.
So who founded existential thought?
Okay. So there's kind of two answers.
Okay.
So some people say Soren Kierkegaard founded, or was the father of existentialism. And some people say Friedrich Nietzsche founded existential thought. For the sake of time, I will roll with Nietzsche. So he was born in Germany on October 15th of 1844. Nietzsche proposed the idea that people are not born with any essence or predeterminism at all. And he claimed that there was no given path nor meaning that any individual was born with, nor was there any innate meaning of the existence of life or the world itself, that the world was meaningless. Like it did not have meaning attached to it. Right. He was a nihilist, and he ultimately stated that life has no meaning other than what you give it. And he also claimed that there was no God that gave the world meaning, which you hear that famous quote by Nietzsche that says, God is dead. Well, this is why you hear that quote. Mm-hmm. So this was really revolutionary stuff at the time, and unlike anything that any philosopher had talked about before, to not have a predetermined path to follow and to be in charge of creating your own meaning in life, your own purpose, was such an abstract, absurd thought. Nietzsche was an atheist, and people often think of existentialism as something believed only by atheists, but this isn't true. Søren Kierkegaard was a theist. So he saw becoming a Christian as the task of a lifetime. And he also believed that Abraham was the only true Christian and that everyone else could just try to approximate themselves to Abraham, but that, Abraham had so much faith in God that no one could get to that level of faith. But so a person can be an existential theist, but the argument isn't that God doesn't exist. The argument is that God exists, but he didn't make the world or humans with a particular purpose in mind. So that's what Kierkegaard believed. And even though they came about around the same time, I think Kierkegaard started writing maybe a couple decades before Nietzsche. They were alive around the same time.
So is that like God is the clockmaker? Like God, is that's like theism, right? Like God makes the clock, but he's not sitting there like.
I think you could see it as that. Like, do you mean just allowing time to pass? Like, however
right, like,
it needs?
It's the initial, like, well, essence. But I feel like when I was studying some of this in college, and I think it was like theism, and I remember like Benjamin Franklin, there was a couple people where they're like, but the whole like key phrase was God is the clockmaker, and it like God is like, creates the world, turns it on, and then steps back, right? And then you have to, figure it out from there.
That's a really interesting concept. I think maybe you could apply that to what Soren Kierkegaard was trying to say. I've never thought about that. I've heard that phrase so many times, and I've never thought about it in that way. Yeah, I guess you could really apply it like, so there's no meaning. The world exists and people exist, right? So you're born and then you exist.
Right, and he was saying God exists to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, no, he's saying God definitely exists.
Right.
Like he totally believes in God, or Kierkegaard does, but just that God made a world without meaning.
Right.
Which means you can't find answers anywhere, and you have to come up with all your own answers.
Right, you're responsible.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, basically, here you go. Here's the planet. Enjoy. It's very scary because you have to come up with all of your choices and all of your answers on your own.
Right.
Which we'll talk about the existential crisis, like, here in a little bit, and kind of tie that, which can be very anxiety inducing, right? But my favorite existential philosopher is Jean-Paul Sartre. So I'm going to be mostly talking about him. He was born in Paris, France on June 21st of 1905. He was influenced by Nietzsche, but he was also greatly influenced by Karl Marx and Immanuel Kant, and a handful of other philosophers. So I particularly really like Sartre, and I don't know if it's just because he's more contemporary, or what, but like I purchased essays in existentialism, like, I don't know, 2013, 2014, something like that. And I was like pretty interested, but I really didn't look as much into him, like I was saying earlier, until after my bachelor's degree. So I'd read some, but I didn't really, really get into Sartre until later. Mm-hmm. But I think he has some really fascinating things to say that I don't entirely agree with. Mm-hmm. But I still think it's interesting. And I still think it's good to look at other, like, ways that people think and ways to process the world, right?
Right. Just because you enjoy someone's work doesn't mean that you have to know everything about them and agree with their entire philosophy on life, but you can still say, wow, that's a really beneficial concept. Thank you for that gift.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And we'll get into that too. Because we'll kind of look at like practical ways to think of existentialism and how that can help with a spiritual journey, which seems totally like contradictory.
Right.
Right.
You got to clear out all the stuff so that now you can put it back into place how you want it. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what does the moral code look like within existentialism?
So this is a really simple but really complex question to answer. So Nietzsche says that people don't really have to adhere to any moral code, but he gets to this answer by looking at the socio-historical context of morality and values. So he wrote the Genealogy of Morals in 1887, and he looks at what society values as good and bad, and then also as good and evil, which are two separate things. He looks at, like, he calls them modes of valuation, and he looks at like the knightly mode of valuation and then the priestly mode of valuation. And again, he does so in like a socio-historical complex. And he talks about morals and self-determinism in many of his works, but I think for the sake of time, I'll describe Sartre's view on the moral philosophy of existentialism rather than trying to explain Nietzsche's take, because I just think he breaks it down easier.
Right.
It really just comes down to that. I just think it's more plain and simple.
Right.
So Sartre was a prominent existentialist. He got a lot of attention after World War II. Really, existentialism did in general, because of the horrors of war. War is depressing. People were really searching for an answer as to why something like the Holocaust could happen. Something so immoral and putrid and hateful, and existentialism also, it offered an answer, right? Mm-hmm. Sartre was also Jewish, which I think is very important to, as something to keep in mind about him as well. So people were really desperate for answers as to like, how can something so chaotic and truly like horrific happen? Mm-hmm. And in existentialism, there's no meaning, there's no rules, there's no moral code. And because of this, people are excruciatingly free, is what Sartre would say. And this freedom to make choices leads to anguish, and it also leads to anxiety. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is because no one has a specific moral code that they have to follow, such as like the moral code established by the church or society. And individuals have to come up with their own moral code, and that can lead to chaos, such as the horrors of war and genocide. And that is, in just a very short paragraph, what Sartre offered as an answer. Now, there are so many of his works, and there are books, obviously, by him that I haven't read. Again, I am not an expert. I know enough to talk in pretty good depth about existentialism, but he essentially says, if you have that much freedom, then you can make a lot of bad choices.
Right.
And with those bad choices, regret is inevitable. Well, mistakes are inevitable. Mistakes are inevitable. But if you're trying to come up with answers in an answerless world, then you just have to make the best decisions that you can. And that looks very different for a lot of people, right? Like that can look different for a lot of people, and it can cause some really awful things to happen.
Because it's like you're just experimenting. If you don't have the foundation of morals or ethics that are passed down and given to you, and you're creating your own framework and you're experimenting, and you're like, well, I actually didn't like that. That felt bad. So I'm going to chuck that into not part of my morals going forward because I don't like how that feels. But then there's, there might be some shame that now you're going to have to deal with because of the feeling, from that experiment going poorly. I don't know. I could see how that would be hard. It might be easier to fall back on just following whatever moral code is just already there, because then you can be like, well, this is good. This is what good is, right? Versus saying what is good for me in this moment, and how does that affect the people around me? Like, it is what's good for me also good for others? I don't know. I feel like that's the whole thing with philosophy, because you keep asking more and more questions about it, but it is sort of an experiment. And so you don't know how an experiment's going to go, which is where the anxiety comes from, because you're like, I have no idea how this might be a failed experiment. Like,
well, and like when we get into the existential crisis, I'll break that.
Right.
I'll break that down too. And kind of go over anxiety and whatnot. But to also respond to what you said, so Sartre states that if you look at institutions of authority like the church or a government or the head of your family, they really don't know anything more than you do.
Right.
Because they're also just trying to figure out their own meaning for their own life.
Right.
And their moral code, right? And so the best advice that they can give you is what they've discovered for themselves, which really might not be any better than what you as an individual has already discovered.
Right.
And Sartre states that if you fall in line with what someone else has told you that you should believe in, or what you should do with your life. Like if somebody else tries to give you a meaning to live by or live up to, if you prescribe to their moral code or to their meaning for your life, instead of coming up with answers to your questions yourself, or instead of coming up with your own meaning for what you want to do with your finite existence, then you can't be your fully authentic self. And that if you can't live authentically, which you see that like in word art and stuff, live authentically. Well, what that means is probably not what a lot of those people are thinking. That that's like italicized on like beige word art, right? It's very Modern Farmhouse. Every time we do this podcast, we talk about how much we hate Modern Farmhouse. This is just a side note. Modern Farmhouse is bad. This might be very controversial. I don't think you'll lose listeners over this, but if you do, are you really losing that much? Are you? Modern Farmhouse is a fucking atrocity. But if you, so it's Satra, live authentically. But like what he means by living authentically is that if you don't come up with your own moral code, and if you don't come up with your own meaning, then you're living in bad faith.
Right. And you're basically just replicating what's already been done. And there's nothing authentic about repeating or mimicking something that's already happening. And I feel like, our creative power, what's so beautiful about that is that it expresses itself uniquely. But if we have all these restrictions and these codes and these things, where we're not really allowed to express ourselves authentically, I mean, it's like we're just clones at that point. We're all just doing the exact same thing that people did like 1,000 years ago because they had these rules, and now we're still doing the same rules, even though we've evolved as humans, So I feel like authenticity is really important, and that's how we evolve into something different. That's how we create a new thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So luckily there's people that are, encouraging authenticity without putting it in Modern Farmhouse form on their Times New Roman to be authentic. But like for real, I mean,
when did they start using Times New Roman? You know what I want to see? I want to see Modern Farmhouse art with Comic Sans. That's what I want to see. I'm gonna start turning in all my papers in Comic Sans.
Right.
My professors would never talk to me again.
I'm being authentic.
I like Comic Sans. It looks like a crayon. Let me have it. So Satra, says, okay, well, live authentically, or like you're living in bad faith, and you have to accept how absurd it is that nothing has meaning. So absurdity in existential thought is the fact that things exist without any meaning. And that's absurdity. It's different from, like your basic, like Webster's definition of what is absurd.
It's like its own philosophy.
Yeah. And so exactly. Well, and it's part of existential philosophy.
Right,
so if you live your life the way that you see fit and with the meaning that you give it, then you can live authentically. Maybe Modern Farmhouse people are just really deep thinkers.
Maybe.
It's somewhere between the grays.
The grays.
The grays. It's somewhere between the pampas grass. It's just it's well hidden and well blended because they don't like bold colors.
Right, maybe.
Yeah.
Live boldly.
Live boldly. It's like
and authentic.
They're both written in gray.
Oh, I love it.
We hate Modern Farmhouse. I would pick it over Modern Farmhouse decor. It's so bad.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell that it's not my go-to.
Yeah, no. Astral's house is very colorful.
Yeah.
It's the antithesis of Modern Farmhouse. So I'm hoping by now there's no more Modern Farmhouse people listening. We don't like pampas grass. That was the point. It wasn't really to talk about existentialism. It was to talk shit.
Yeah, the point of this whole episode.
Yes.
So when we talk about existentialism, how does this apply to the idea of reincarnation?
So, okay. So I've thought about this a lot. This could be a topic all on its own, like an entire podcast all on its own. So existentialism doesn't ponder reincarnation because the reincarnation of the soul, which, by the way, I just want to point out, when you think of reincarnation, this has nothing to do with like Buddhist reincarnation. A lot of people think that there is a soul in Buddhism. There is no soul in Buddhism. There is only a string of energy that goes lifetime to lifetime. That's it. There's no soul in Buddhism. So when I'm talking about reincarnation, I want to be very specific that I'm not talking about the like Buddhist reincarnation. I'm talking about the reincarnation of the soul repeatedly over and over in living form. So existentialism doesn't consider reincarnation because existence precedes essence. You have to be born before you can attribute any meaning to your life, before you can come up with what is important to you. So when you talk about existentialism, you were talking about one specific unique life cycle from beginning to end and what an individual does with that life. There's no essence that says we're born to do any particular thing, and there's no essence from past life experiences. Existentialism is purely about giving your life meaning right here, right now, with no predestiny attached. Because of this, our actions and ourselves as individuals lack any real inherent importance because we don't have a true meaning other than we don't have a meaning that's given to us, right? We can have a true meaning that we attribute to ourselves, that we determine ourselves, but we're not given one. And that connects directly to the concept of the absurd. And so when you think about it in that way, because there are no answers and because humans desperately want answers and they want to know their life's purpose and they search for these answers, but they don't find any meaningful answer because the universe doesn't have a specific purpose or reason to exist. The existential concept of absurdity is succinctly summed up by, this is my favorite Stephen Crane poem. I only know 3 of them, but a man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist. However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." So that's really optimistic. Truly, that's a really positive message. And as you know, I've mentioned before that the best choice is the one you come up with based on your own values and moral compass that you discover and you set out for yourself. But that this can lead to anguish, and the anguish is the fact that you can't find any answers to anything beyond what you can give to yourself, which again produces anxiety, right? So now to get back to the main question. So I needed to say all of that to say this. To get back to the main question as to how reincarnation applies to existentialism, it doesn't, because that is not a concept. Again, there's no essence, right? There's no predetermined essence. There's no predeterminism in existentialism. But I believe the way I like to see existentialism and how it applies to reincarnation for me, right, is that I believe it allows a person to be more present in what they're experiencing right now, and to really take in every experience and assign your own meaning to those experiences. And in being more present, you can live a much fuller life. And also, so obviously I believe in reincarnation. I don't know if there's anyone that's walked into your house that hasn't. That's a pretty given thing, that reincarnation exists. And some people might hear that statement and think, is it really though? And it's like, well, for me, and I think for you too, we weren't people who came and looked for that information. It was something that was just given to us freely. Right. It was something that just came to us and we realized, so, I do have these past life experiences, and there's a reason that other psychic intuitives can pick up on, my past lives or my past traumas or whatever.
Right. And there's karma to a certain extent that is carrying over. But if you also think about it, there must be some reason for the forgetting, or why would we? And so that's where existentialism comes in, because it gives you that freedom of, well, what if you were just here now? And what if you didn't sit here and overanalyze the meaning of it all? What if you just lived day by day, moment by moment, without thinking, I must have done something 10,000 years ago to deserve this? What if you just felt it and were present, you know? And there's that thing with Nietzsche where it's like the love of your fate, right? And you're just fully present and you're just like, whatever happens, happens, right? So
Yeah.
the thing is like, I think for many of us, religion and spirituality, it's necessary. But then we also have this, you know, like if you're just living your life, like you don't necessarily have to give all this meaning to it per se. You could just have the experience of life as well. But for some people, they need that deeper meaning. Like that's what helps them wake up in the morning and, you know, do the work and get through the day. But it's not necessary for everybody. You know, some people, it's like, I don't know, they're just having these experiences moment by moment, and they're not necessarily saying, okay, well, this happened to me because of this, or, you know what I mean? It's like they're just living.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a person who doesn't, I see meaning in, I don't want to say every single little tiny thing, because sometimes like just shit happens, and then you know, because you have the human existence, like you have your existence right now and things just happen. But I see meaning in a lot of things. I see meaning, if I'm trying to do something in particular and I keep being blocked from a certain thing, then I think, okay, well, I'm going to go a different path. Right. Because the universe does have a meaning. And it is telling me, okay, well, this isn't the correct path for you by putting up roadblocks, right? And sending me somewhere else that is more suitable and better for me and will serve a higher purpose for me. What the meaning the universe has, I have no idea. But it does have a meaning.
Right.
I would think, but even though I believe those things, it's still, existential thought is so helpful in being present. It's so helpful in being present. And also there is the concept in existentialism that you don't really want to waste time. Whether that's explicitly said or not, you don't want to waste time on things that don't serve you, except that is explicitly said when you break down the existential crisis. So if you can also view it as like, okay, I like the thought of, so even though I've had many, many past lives and, you know, have many, many more lives, right? I like the thought, and you as well, of maybe someone that we were close with in a previous life, has come in and they no longer serve our purpose or whatever, or our relationship with them now is non-attachment. So I think with existentialism, you can kind of roll sort of comfortably into the lesson of non-attachment,
Right.
with a person. And again, just being present. And if they don't show up for you, then you just let them go.
Right.
Right.
Because that's the flow, right? They're floating this way, and you're not going to try to cling, because you can't cling anyways. And
No,
that's its own like spirituality, right? It's like the nothingness, like not forcing, and allowing is its own, to me, a spiritual practice, because I do try to be like, oh, I'll just hang on to this toxic thing for as long as I possibly can until I'm sick. Or I could just allow things that are ready to flow off to do that, right? So when we cling, it ends up creating issues anyways. So I feel like there's all sorts of spirituality that's around not clinging.
Yeah.
And just, you know, everything at some point will dissolve, like the form that we see it in. And so it's like, it's you can't cling anyways, right? It's like, it's always going to be evolving and changing forms. So.
Well, there's that. And I think that flows directly in with disentanglement. And allowing yourself to be disentangled from things that don't serve a higher purpose for you. Right. And to spend your time again on true desires and goals and things that make you happy and things that make you feel good, and to get away from people that are condescending or demeaning and treat you like garbage. Or just things that don't really serve. Something doesn't even have to be dysfunctional. If it just doesn't, if a person or a thing or a job, like, if you're content and you're okay with that, that's good. You know, well, I don't want to say it's good, but it's fine, right? But if a person really wants to change things up and they want to experience non-attachment, and they really want to disentangle themselves maybe from like a job that it's not horrible, but it's not great, and it pays your bills, but you could do better, right? Then like I think existentialism it can provide a really good insight into here's maybe why you should let go of that position, and maybe why you should spend your time on something that you feel really, really good about. Now, obviously it's like we live in a society, as George Costanza would say, right? Like we live in a society, and that society happens to be a capitalist hellscape, and you can't just dump like your job without some type of backup plan. Let's be very realistic. But the point I'm trying to make is if you look at existential thought and you use it to be in the present, then that can be so beneficial for your life and I think also for your health. So you're not constantly having to overthink everything, and you can just flow with what happens. And now I know that you're a very assertive person, and I'm a very assertive person as well. And you're an energy mover, and you like to get things done, right? But you are particularly very good about, like, as you've gotten older, about, like you were saying, letting things flow more, and how that's its own philosophical teaching in and of itself, spiritual, but philosophical teaching, right? And I do think that existentialism can be very helpful for that.
Right.
Yeah. And even if you were to say, okay, well, this friendship sucked this time, maybe this person will learn their karmic lessons, it'll be better next time. You can say that, or you can just say, well, fuck it. It's two simple words. It can make such a difference.
Right.
You know, like just fuck them. It's fine.
And that's where it's like creating your own morals and living in your own integrity is important. So like the way that I view certain things might be different than another person. It doesn't take away that it's important to them, but there's certain morals and certain religious laws that absolutely do not apply to me.
Yeah.
And when I break them, I feel no shame. Because like it's not in my code of ethics, right? I have certain things that, you know, I definitely have like values and things that I wouldn't do or whatever, but it looks different for me, right? Based on my own experiments and how I felt about, you know, this or that. But, you know, there's certain things that would feel really toxic to me, you know, about if, you know, that these rules that had been passed down over time. And I'm like, I'm not wanting to hang on to all of these people, or you know what I mean? Or like if I put myself first, now I'm a narcissist or something like that, which some of these morals might make you think that, right? And they might make you think that if you think about how you feel and put yourself first, well, now you're not putting the tribe first or the community first. And that's the thing about like questioning, you know, does this work for me as an individual? Does this particular rule work for me?
Yeah.
And some of them do. Some of them, you know, like, you know, don't murder people and stuff like that. Like saying,
I'm on the I think not killing other people is good.
And I think the golden rule is great. That works. Yes. But then there's certain other ones where I'm like, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Yeah.
Right? But then I have certain rules that I live by that totally wouldn't work for another person. And that would drive them mad, right? But I'm like, well, that's just, you know, it's valuable to me, so I have this particular practice. But I feel like it's important to give yourself that freedom to ask yourself, like, why am I giving this particular thing so much meaning, you know, and what are my values? Like at the core, like, what do I really believe? And do I believe this just because someone told me to believe it? Or do I actually believe it because I see it and I feel it and I'm experiencing it, and so I believe it because I can have that experience for myself. I'm not just believing it because I was raised in a particular community that said to believe it, right? And so it's like, I don't know. And then it becomes more meaningful because you actually believe it, not because you're forced to believe it. I don't know. So I like the free will and all that, but, you know, Aries, Sun, Aquarius rising, I'm like, I was always going to create my own path, you know? But I think that there's a place, you know, for all these other paths too, you know, but like, just don't enforce them on me, right?
So no, well, absolutely. And so what I want to point out is you said something specifically just a moment ago that was you came up with these ideas on your own, right? Like these are things that came to you,
right?
And what I mentioned earlier about reincarnation, well, that was just something that came to both of us separately at different times in our lives.
Right. I wasn't raised in a family that taught reincarnation.
No. And no, like not by any means, right? And I wasn't either. But, and you've always, so people who listen to your podcast, they know that you are highly empathetic and like psychically empathetic, not just emotionally.
Right.
And that you are so in tune, not just with your body and not just in a spiritual sense with the surroundings, like with your surroundings, but you have had, ever since you were really little, you've had all these different spiritual experiences that led to your belief system today. Right. I was the same way, right? So I'm like, little 6-year-old wild psychic Kimmie, right? That sees all kinds of things and talks to all sorts of things that no one else in my household could see, and they all thought something was really wrong with me. And because society will tell you, well, if you're seeing things that aren't generally there to other people, then that's crazy or schizophrenic. Now, schizophrenia is a real thing. Okay, that's an actual for real mental illness that affects the brain, and there are actual hallucinations you can have.
It's different.
It's totally different. It's totally different.
I'm not paranoid.
No.
That's 101.
No.
Super paranoid. I don't think anything's coming to get me.
No.
But I do hear voices. So I'm like,
whatever. and then you'll
it's
hear
not all the
them.
time. I mean, they're not telling me to do weird shit. That's the difference.
No,
right?
they're your guides coming in, and they're saying, hey, think about this for your health.
Right.
Think about this for your daughter. Right. Think about and
they're not intrusive either.
No.
That's another separation of with schizophrenia. It is intrusive. It's like they don't have any control over.
No.
But this is not like unsolicited information. It's like I'm seeking guidance. I can find it.
Well, yeah. And when you're looking for that information, like you're, looking in the Akashic records or whatever, right?
Right. And I have an intention.
Then it comes to you. Mm-hmm. And if I am, so my version is very simply like, I can think about a person, I'll know instantly what's going on with them. Just fucking, she just rolled her eyes at me.
Well, not in a negative way. I've watched it happen. I don't even have to tell Kimmie what's going on.
I'll be like, hey bitch, how you doing? You having a rough day today? Yeah. I'm here. I'm supportive. Love you, girl.
Right. It's nice though. It's nice that you can tune into it that quickly and just be like, okay, I understand. And that's where the empathy comes in, is because it can almost be overwhelming, right? Because you're like, oh wow, she is having a bad day, I need to check on her, right? But
well, and I've found many times that people who are more open to spirituality and who aren't totally full of themselves, and the people who know that they don't have life totally figured out are the easiest people to read as well. The people who are more into the esoteric are easier to read. And the people who are on your level of being intuitive and being psychic and who works with the Akashic records, you're just information just flows fast. And I'm that way with a lot of my psychic friends. I mean, and they'll know if something's going on with me, and it's weird how there's this free flow of energy, and it's not non-consensual. Right. It's there. And, whether it's coming straight from me or my guides or whatever, right? And so, and also, and I don't know if this is, I get a lot of telepathy. Mm-hmm. Telepathy is my big thing. I'll know what someone's thinking right before they say it. I'll say their sentence for them, whatever, constantly, all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that all intuitives experience that to a certain extent, but that's a big thing for me.
Right.
And so again, both of us as individuals, and I think a lot of people probably listening as well, you come up with your own answers.
Right.
The church never felt right to me. I don't knock anyone who goes to church. I do knock bigots, right, that want to harm, people for being gay or being women with physical bodies or whatever, right? But, you can be very much a Christian person and totally be exactly what you would think of. I hate to say ideally, because, nobody's, and perfect is also such a subjective term, right? Mm-hmm. But it's okay to not be air quote perfect.
Right.
And to have more of a loving and open and kind and considerate and not super conservative view on things just because you're part of a particular religion is also,
Right.
that's what I'm trying to get at. So it doesn't mean that like all, and also I think existentialism is helpful in saying that like everyone makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And if everybody's just looking for answers on their own, then you're going to make mistakes no matter what, because again, it's part of the human condition.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like I am personally very pleased with how, as I've gotten older and I didn't have to listen to other people and everything just came to me. Of course, I was introduced to things like Reiki and whatnot, but everything was always there.
Right. And then you choose how you respond to it. Like you get introduced to things and then you have the free will and the choice to say, well, this actually lights me up. It makes me feel good. So I'm going to continue studying it. And that, I don't know. I feel like that's where some of these philosophies help us, because they give us that freedom to explore and to make our own choices and to create our own future.
Yeah.
Based on our will. Like, what do we want to create in this world, So, but, I feel like some people, like their creativity is like stunted somehow and they just don't think that they could, or, like how could I make a choice like that? Or, I don't know. And it becomes easier to just do the same thing every day and to live by the same rules and,
Well, and that's like, and that also is where the existential crisis comes in.
So could you kind of just explain that real quick for us? Like, what is an existential crisis?
So, okay. So there are 5 stages to the existential crisis, but I'm going to try to make it succinct. So it's the questioning of why. Why, exactly what you were just saying a second ago, Astral. Like, why am I doing this particular thing? Because one, society tells me to. Why do I live? Why is it that I live in a certain condition, like certain part of the globe, or why am I with, I really like to think about it like, why do I have a certain friendship? Why am I with a particular partner that is very abusive, right? It's the questioning. So that's the first stage. And then from the questioning, you realize that you have a choice. So realizing that you don't have to adhere to, like I had a friend many years back. I haven't heard from her in a very long time. I hope she's doing well. But I had a friend who lived in a Mennonite community, and she was totally excommunicated because she escaped. And she decided that she wanted to pursue her own life and live the way that she wanted to. And it was quite literally traumatic for her to think, just to question, which she did for years. Why am I in this community? How do I get emancipated? Because she was really young at the time and she left as soon as she turned 18. I mean, she was gone. Right. She was gone. But the thing is there's more than just an age constraint. If you live in a community, for her and her Mennonite community, it was very constrictive, right? And she got totally excommunicated. Her family stopped talking to her, all of them. She had a brother, quit talking to her. Everyone quit talking to her. She had to start life entirely on her own. And she didn't have a lot of friends because she wasn't allowed to have them. And she didn't have access to technology because it was a very, very, very strict community that she lives in. Now, I'm also not an expert on Mennonite communities, but I understand that there are different allowances for technology and things like that, right? But hers was very, very, very strict. And she had to always wear dresses, and she wanted to be her own individual. Right. So she started out life totally on her own, like once she turned 18, right? And so, and the questioning before that was just so traumatic and led her to anguish, right? But do I stay inside my family that I love, or do I leave and I totally start over? So she went through a quite literal existential crisis.
Right.
And it's the questioning. And then it's the realization that you have choice. And it's the realization that those choices look so different and there's so many choices. And now some people will say, well, what about, like, I know that this is what I often think of. And in fact, I came across, which I'd always thought this of Sartre, but I came across like a video about him and somebody mentioned, well, what about prisoners? And then the person like responds to them and says, well, but Sartre would say you still have the ability to like make prison the best experience it can be for you, or you can be depressed, or you can study. Like you have lots and lots and lots of different options, right? Well, for some people have lots and lots of different options, but everybody has options, even if they're limited, constricted options.
Right.
So the realization that you have these options, but that they might totally blow your world out of proportion, maybe like with where you'd really like to see yourself. Because obviously for her, she didn't want to lose her family, but she did.
All right.
So, and I don't know, this has been like 10, 15 years ago almost. I have no idea if she ever reconnected with them,
Right.
or what that looked like. But I know that, again, she was never allowed back in.
Right.
Like, so I don't know if they all left at some point and then they could communicate with her. I have no idea what happened, but I just really hope that she's okay. But so essentially, if you start questioning and you realize you have choices, but you don't have any guidance, then that causes the anxiety.
Right.
So if you are looking for answers in quote an answerless world, and you have no direction, you're more likely to make mistakes. And these mistakes can lead to regret. But existential thought, and I think this is really fascinating, existential thought says mistakes are part of the human condition, and you should not have regrets. And you should absolve yourself of any regrets because you're looking for answers when there are no answers other than what you can give yourself. Mistakes are inevitable.
Right.
Regretting things just hurts you.
Right.
So just don't. No regrets. Like
Right.
no regrets. Have none.
Right.
And so it's. I think that can be really illuminating, and you can only make the best decision you can make for yourself at the time.
Right.
And if that turns out to not be good later, well, then you didn't really know.
But now you do.
But now you do.
Right.
And now you can make better decisions for yourself, right? So I like the fact that existential thought says you really shouldn't have regrets because mistakes are just a part of the human condition. So that's essentially what an existential crisis is.
Right.
Yeah, like in a very brief nutshell.
Right. And I think we all, maybe go through a little cycle of this as we start to become more individual, as we start to leave, even just graduating high school. Like that's a big, getting out of that group think that you've been raised in since kindergarten.
Yeah.
Then you branch out, you go to college, and you're like, oh, wow, there's all these new beliefs and ideas. And wow, it's like it's a whole new world out here. Right. So I think like there's certain phases where we'll have these little crisis moments where we're like, oh, it's like there's so much more beyond what I could even imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also that, there are some people who get stuck in relationships with people who are very abusive and not good to them. And it's because they can't imagine like, a world without that other person in it. Well, there's a whole world out there.
Right.
And you don't have to have that person in your life. If they don't serve a better purpose for you, if they don't serve a good purpose, then why are they there?
Right. And
So-
it takes a little bit of courage sometimes to get yourself to, cross that threshold.
Yeah.
Because like it's the unknown. That's where the fear comes in. Right. That's because we don't actually know what it would look like to leave that hive mind thinking. We don't know because now it's going to be totally different. So that's like, I could see why there's that anxiety to that, and, but I don't know. I like having that freedom. I like expanding my horizons and constantly like mind fucking myself. Like, oh, here's a whole new thing to experiment with. So, but I could see why that some people wouldn't take it so well.
Yeah, but also, and I just want to be very clear. Obviously, of course, there are situations where people can't like leave, abusive partners or whatever, abusive families, and so I don't mean that in any kind of a victim blamey way at all. But it's just from a purely existential viewpoint is okay. Everybody has choices. And if you, and part of the existential crisis is also, there is this deep realization that you don't have that much time on the planet.
Right.
That your life is finite. And obviously, you know, you and I believe in reincarnation, but that's, you know, from an existential viewpoint, there is only so much time in this lifetime. So existential thought can really be helpful in, again, helping us determine what we really want to explore.
Right, like more focus.
Yes.
In what ways can the framework of existentialism be applied to the usage of witchcraft, healing practices, and other forms of energy manipulation?
So I love how this was like the theme of the podcast, and then I had to explain all the others to get to this point, right? So now we're kind of maybe 75% of the way around the circle. So when you use witchcraft, and again, I'm using that term to specifically describe like the burning of candles and herbs and the usage of even just fire and trinkets and whatnot to cause something to happen, to manipulate energy into whatever you want that to be. Okay. So this is a really controversial take. So I'm part of the spiritual community, and you always hear like love and light. Don't do it if it's not love and light. I'm not always a love and light person. I'm not. I would never, ever, ever go out of my way to purposely hurt anyone, but hell hath no fury if I am scorned. Okay.
Right,
hell
right.
hath no fury. So, which is probably a place where, well, no, because okay. So you don't want to overreact as a person, right? And I try to stay very, very cool because one, I get migraines, and if I don't stay as even tempered as possible, then the migraines flare up. That
Right.
just is a thing, right? So I know that it's physically harming my body to get pissed, but also you don't want to be a doormat.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when if there's something big enough for you to really, really complain about that really affects your life, like I like to think about it. Now, obviously I'm not the master at this, but I like to think about things. If something has really upset me, I think, well, I'd be really upset about this 5 years from now.
Right.
Right. Is this something you're going to be sour about for years? And so with that, we are not love and light all the time. We're not. You know, sometimes I have about 10% of a shit to give to anyone. So, and about, you know, I'm negative when I have like a migraine, I don't feel well. And so my take on like using witchcraft and things like that is there's a lot of gray area. The fact of the matter is that the thing that we all have in common, I've said this like multiple times, is the human condition, right? Like we all have a human 3D existence. And if you have bills to pay and you want to do energy work on bringing money to you, some people see that as very awful and very greedy. I don't at all. It's not like you're going to turn into a billionaire. You know, it just means that you're going to make things easier on yourself. I've even heard of some people, I had a conversation with someone once that they said that they would not do energy work to try to help get a job because they were concerned about interfering with someone else's ability to get that job by making themselves more energetically attractive to the potential employer. And I thought, wow, you know, I understand being considerate of other people, but it's really not your responsibility to work everybody else's shit out for them. You can just do things for you.
Right.
And if it's something that would be good for you, now you can use energy work to push for good or bad things that will, as in things that could be bad for you. I'm not talking about like morally bad, again, because we're using existentialism as a framework, but you can push for things that maybe there had been a lot of roadblocks before, but maybe also, so yes, the universe will put up a lot of roadblocks for you to go a different way that's going to suit you better, kind of naturally. But if there's something you really, really want and you put a little bit of energy work in there and then you see that door start to open, then you say, oh, okay, this was a lesson in using my power.
Right.
That's when it turns from the universe is blocking me to I'm going to force things to happen for myself because I deserve this. This is a lesson in using power. So there's a lot of lessons about letting go, but there's also lessons about power and using that power.
And taking action.
Exactly.
And that's where I feel like, some of these codes from the past was just like, be humble, be patient, and it's like, this is a virtue, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes humility is at your own detriment, and you have to be able to recognize that. It doesn't mean that you're not a humble person in general, and that you're not, like, you're going to just like force yourself on people or whatever. But sometimes you got to take a little action. Sometimes you got to make things happen, and you have that kind of power, So it's like some of these laws or these rules will actually limit people from putting themselves out there, or from actually evolving into, their higher potential.
Exactly.
A higher potential.
And so with that, with what you're saying about like past values and things, so what you're referring to is like priestly values, which kind of translates into what people see now as like kindness and forgiveness and vulnerability as being like good, and then like aggression and things like that as being evil. So which again is like the priestly mode of valuation, Nietzsche would say. And then Nietzsche would also say that the knightly / aristocratic mode of valuation would, like, it compares good and bad, not good and evil.
Right.
And the good would be aggressiveness.
Right.
Or being rich. But it's like the values flipped.
Right.
Right. Like whenever you, and those were values that were held high by the Romans. And bad values, quote bad, were like being really humble.
Right.
Like are you going to go fight? You're too nice.
Right.
Like you're too soft of a person, like that kind of thing. That was seen as bad. But then the values flipped. And that's why, again, like in the genealogy of morals, he goes into like the socio-historical context of what is good versus what is bad, and then what is good versus what is evil, and the value
it's like
change.
a teeter-totter.
Yeah.
And then
just kind of
the
flips.
key here, though, is when you evaluate them from these opposite polarities, you're able to see the in-between gray a lot easier.
Yeah.
And so it's not that this is good or this is bad. It's really up to you to get on that teeter-totter and say, okay, this is good for me. That's actually toxic for me. And make up your own values based on how they feel for you as an individual.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need to see the black and white so that you can understand actually it's somewhere in between. Like, this is good sometimes, and I might consider that to be bad sometimes. But in this moment,
it's good.
It's good.
Yeah. So it's okay to look at things and, again, like, establish a balance or whatever you want, right? Something else that I want to mention about existentialism and witchcraft is that, or just energy manipulation in general, is that I've seen so many people say that, like, attracting love, especially if it's that of a specific person, like, let's say this person is available and doesn't, they're not tied up in another relationship, or they're not happily married, like that kind of thing, So let's say, just hypothetically, like, you wanted to attract a particular person's love, and that they're open and available, or maybe they're having a shitty toxic relationship that they have said, hey, this is shitty and bad for me, but I can't get away from it, whatever. And you throw that out there in the universe. And then at some point they come around to you. Just whenever it makes sense energetically, right?
Right.
Because you've put in the energy work and said, hey, I want this person to come to me at some point. Or maybe, I know that a lot of energy workers are like, well, it's okay if you just say that you want true love. And I'm like, well, I think you can use it on a specific person. It's love. If you have good intentions, why not?
Right.
Why not? And that can be a gray area. So I think when you go back and you look at existential thought, you can say, okay, well, I don't have to totally prescribe to that moral code. Now, I will say that the universe does dish out some pretty heavy karma if it's not just and you're doing energy work. So if you are out there just like trying to wreck people's lives for funsies,
then your life gets wrecked for funsies.
It does. And if you try, yes, so many times over. And also, if you really try to push something onto someone who has a lot of protection on them, like if you're trying to push something bad onto someone just because you don't like them and they have a lot of protection on them and they're a very powerful person, that turns out to be a disaster for whomever is trying to push that energy. So So, there's also that at play too, because it isn't just about what the universe sees as okay. It's about what that individual person's power looks like and the protection they have around them, right? So again, there's so many gray areas when you're doing any kind of energy work that doesn't have a specific moral code attributed to it. My code, again, is I don't ever go out of my way to do anything bad to anybody. Obviously, you don't either. But if something needs to be protected or fixed, then I will do it.
Right.
But there's so many people that are terrified to use any kind of witchcraft, candle work, anything on a particular person or for money or for whatever. And I'm like, listen, like you can determine what is okay for you.
Right.
And if you're not out and being malicious, then, why not? So even though all these concepts we've talked about, we've went back to morality like so many times. And like, well, we went back to what does a moral compass really need to look like? And that isn't a thing in existentialism other than what you make it. So for me, I find that helpful because that's what I've made it.
Right.
And if other people want to be judgmental of that, that's fine because they're not in my little bubble.
Right. And they're allowed to have their own experience.
Yeah, they can have their own experience and that's fine. And and it can turn out really, really good for them.
Right.
So, that's great. But it allows you to I guess be aware of the space that you should give other people to make their own decisions. I think that's very helpful.
Right.
With existentialism.
Yeah. And not letting it limit your decisions.
Yes.
All right. So we've talked about this for a bit now. So I have to ask, do you prescribe to existentialism?
So I find it helpful and I find it useful. And I especially find it useful because I came up with a lot of answers on my own. And because of all the personal experiences that I had, right? But no, I don't, because I feel like whenever you prescribe to a certain moral philosophy, you have to really, really, really follow that through. Now, I like Immanuel Kant and his Kantian ethics a lot, which maybe we'll do an episode on that at some point. But I'm not Kantian either. But again, what is existential about my beliefs is that, I do feel like you can be more present in this lifetime. I like that it can lead to the letting go of regret. I feel like that's very, very healing for oneself. So even though I'm not an existentialist, I have some existential beliefs.
Right.
But in moral philosophy, that's not enough. And you really have to you have to really, really buy in. And I don't entirely because of my own experiences, which is kind of very existential on its own because of my own experiences. So, I don't know. But I also believe in reincarnation. So no. Right. That's also a gray area. But I appreciate existentialism a lot.
Right.
So something that I want to close with is that, so obviously, we've talked about, I'm a psychic intuitive and I've been just a totally full blown psychic for forever. And in past lives, and I'm sure I'll continue to be in future lives, and I move energy and I know, I try to humble myself because I know that I'm not the best person there is out there, in any, meaning of that word. But I know that I'm in tune enough to say that, and without getting into ascended masters or basically the spiritual committee that's over the Akashic records that lets you see what you're allowed to see and won't let you see things that they don't feel comfortable letting you see, which you know all about because you do, you open the records all the time.
Right.
And there's
the Lords of the Akashic record.
Yeah, the Lords, exactly. And they have this wild, big energy. And I'll say that I have never, ever known the meaning of our existence, ever. In all of the information that I've received. And I received some information about catastrophic events too that happen, big ones. I'll receive information about political elections a lot of the time because they're so contentious. I often have to be asleep to get those messages because I'm more receptive, right? They'll come to me in dreams. I don't know the meaning of our existence. I do know that we've all had many, many lifetimes. I do know that we don't always incarnate as human beings. I think that sometimes we're on other planets and things as well. I feel like it's been a long, long, long time since that has happened for me. But, and I know that there are some people who like, and I feel like such a hillbilly when I say this. There are some people who know, because I'm from Tennessee. There are some people who know all about like the different alien races and all this different stuff, and I don't. I know the ones that I talked to, and I wasn't looking for them. They just came to me.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. They just come to you, and you're like, that's interesting. You don't look like anything I've seen before. And sometimes I can't see them at all. I had this experience where I've never done Marconics, but I was thinking of it. And like, you know, I have a friend that does Marconics, and I was thinking of her. And I started seeing all these beings, and I was like, well, I can't see your faces. And there were all these bright white lighted beings, and they were all shadowed out, but they were like, their energy was so big. And I described that to another friend that was not the same friend I was thinking of, and she said, oh, those are extraterrestrials. They're just a different one than you're used to. And I was like, oh, okay, because I had never seen an extraterrestrial until like, you know, a couple years back. And when I was doing some like migraine work, or I was getting it done, and so what I realized, because it's not just me, it's like, you know, whenever you're used to getting energy work done, or you're doing it on somebody else or whatever, we'll all kind of see the same being around the same time. Like if it's like three of us, we're all like, whoa, you know, we're like, oh, okay. So I know it's not just me, and I get that confirmation from other people too. Or if I'm working on a friend and I'll say, hey, I saw this, and then they'll say, oh, well, somebody else told me they saw that too earlier this week.
It almost always validates itself somehow.
Yeah. Exactly. And I look for, whenever I do a reading for a person, I swear it's almost like they give back to me. But every time I do something and it's like right on the money, I'm like, so good. I'm like, you're welcome, but also thank you.
Right, because it helps you like trust it more.
Oh, yeah. And at a certain point, you have to get over your, you know, we talked about this in the last episode about getting over like always having to have reassurance and just having a confidence in yourself that, okay, this is actually what I'm doing.
Right.
This
Which
is
comes
actually,
with time from being reassured.
Yeah. And
you
so,
get enough to where you're like, actually, I'm good at this.
And you get rid of the imposter syndrome, right? And so what I'll say is that I've had a lot of spiritual experiences. But and it's weird because no one, when people get readings, they never ever ask me what the meaning of life is, but it's something that I've, you know, was very curious about. And you would think that that's would be what people ask about, but they don't. They say, like, is Joe cheating on me? And I'm like, well, I think he is, honey, but well, first of all, let's work on some other entire situation that is more important in your life than Joe. Joe is a dirtbag, and he's been cheating on you for like 10 years. With your sister, let's talk about something else. You already knew that.
Right, because that's what they're asking.
Like,
I do think people come with questions they already know the answers to.
Oh, I'm sure no, absolutely they do. And that's not a real, you know, but that is, right, that happens a lot. But nobody comes to me and says, what's the meaning of life? Unless it's one of my real spiritual friends. And then they'll come to me and ask shit. And I'm like, girl, I don't know the answer to that, but let's ponder that together. Right. But I've always said that the meaning of life is simply to live it however you want. And I had said that ever since I was like, you know, in my early teens, when I was really starting to have like big ideas. Right. Which now feel like really small ideas, but there's pretty substantial ideas at the time. And what I realized was that it's okay to not know exactly what you're doing. And it's perfectly fine to just do what feels right to you and roll with that. And that was something that I came to the conclusion of way before I ever discovered existentialism. So, that is how I see it. I really don't know what the purpose is. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think now human beings are supposed to help heal this planet at this point.
Right.
I do know that.
Like there's multiple things.
There are, but
It's not like one thing. It's like we have a lot of different things. And what cycle are you looking at, because in the future it might be a little bit different, and
that's a good point.
so it's always evolved. The purpose evolves as you evolve. And that's something that's hard to grasp because people want to think that it's just one thing in their whole life that they're meant to do.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not. It's a lot of things. And when I think about what is the purpose of human life on Earth, which was something I thought about, like, any normal 14-year-old, right? Like, I thought about that a lot. And there was never a specific answer other than do the thing that feels really good to you.
Right.
And that was it. So what I'm getting at is maybe there are some other intuitives out there that understand that better than I do, but I am not ashamed to say I have no idea. Right. I have no idea. I just know that the messages I get tend to be very accurate, as in this. Okay. So before we go, we had this experience where I was driving to Astral's house and I kept seeing this rock. I kept seeing like a, because she collects, like all of us weirdos, she collects crystals and things. And I kept seeing this rock and I thought it was a labradorite and like a palm stone, like a large palm stone. And I was thinking in this rock, which this sounds buck wild, but last year I figured out I could talk to rocks. I understand how that sounds. Anyway, moving on. So I figured out that I could talk to rocks like last year. Had no idea. It was just one of those things that came to me. And so I'm on my way to Astral's house and I keep seeing this rock that's like round in the shape of the palm of a palm. And I'm like, I think that rock really wants me to hold it. And I get here and she has this rock like out sitting like where I would be sitting. And I said, I saw that. I saw that earlier. I saw that on my way here. And it was like 10 minutes before I got to your house. And anyway.
So it's like telepathy between two because I just had this feeling that you would need that rock in your life.
No.
I didn't know that you were going to hold it. Like, I didn't know that you were going to be like, oh, there's that rock I've been talking to. But I sat it there because I felt like somehow it was going to be meaningful, but I didn't know how. And then it's like maybe when I sat it there, that's when you connected to it.
Probably. Because it was like 10 minutes
She
before.
set the intention and she put that rock there.
And it was like, but it was very specifically, this rock was like, right. I want to be with you when you do your session because I'll keep you grounded. And I was like, okay. And so I was going to ask you, I had just walked in the room. I was going to ask you about the rock and then there it was. So anyway, it's those confirmations. And that's why I didn't need to seek answers from other people.
Right. Because you're just getting them.
Yeah. And it doesn't go any further than that. I mean, maybe it goes way further. I don't know, but I try not to take it for granted. And I appreciate when I get the information and when I get it confirmed.
Right.
So the rock was cool.
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool for both of us. So if someone wanted to have like a psychic reading with you or, you do the animal communication and the energy manipulation, if they wanted to work with you, how would they be able to reach out and contact you?
So I have a Facebook page, but honestly, it's easier to call me. So my Facebook page is Flapjack's Curios and Readings by Kimblee. It's Kimblee. I will probably be changing that at some point. Something more along the lines of like Kimmie Haliburda, psychic intuitive, because it sounds like private investigator. I just think it's cool. But the best way to reach me is by phone, and it's 865-224-6858. And I am open for, I do a lot of animal communication. I do animal Reiki. It doesn't matter how big the animal is. I can also do it from a distance. I work on horses, dogs, cats, mice, literally whatever, and people. And so get a hold of me if you want to have me do any work for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming out and doing another episode with us. I've noticed that our audience really likes them. When I was like, okay, they like this vibe. So I appreciate it. I think that they'll appreciate it too. So thank you for your time and all the work you've put into this deep dive on existentialism for us.
Yeah, no, you're so totally welcome. And I want to say one last thing is that I'm not a paid sponsor by any means, but the People Against Modern Farmhouse is my favorite Facebook group. And everybody talks shit about farmhouse decor, but not like real farmhouse decor, like Grage. And we talked about this last podcast, and I would like to plug that at the end of each of our episodes, because I feel like it is monumentally important.
I love it.
It is so important.
The resistance there is so good. Oh, awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I always love being in your presence. So
You're so sweet. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.